The Delaware County Historical Society presents the Delaware County Historical Jail and Sheriff's Residence.
Welcome to the Delaware County Jail. This old building, built in 1878, was again the residence of the sheriff. And we are standing in the entryway. Of course, behind you would be the entryway into the building, and also a double entryway, one directly right behind you, and the other is the door that you entered there today. The two rooms that you would not be able to see right now because they are now the office of a judge here in Delaware, and these living room areas would be just to this side, here to the west side of this entryway. The rest of the jail, though, where the prisoners were kept, we'll see there in a little bit, but here in the residence, now the bedrooms, of course, were upstairs. There was also an area upstairs on the west side room, which would have been where women prisoners would have been held. This building and the whole idea of residences like this being this nice for a sheriff, but when you stop and think of it, the sheriff was an important person in the community. And President Hayes was the one who came up with the idea when he was governor of Ohio that he felt that the prisons were deplorable. For one thing, the cells where they were kept were the same cells for the least of the criminals, even if it was just a very simple crime, and they may be in just for a few days, all the way up to those who were convicted of murder. And they were placed in the same cells. And he thought that this was terrible and that the conditions needed to be improved. And so reform began. And thanks to him, those reforms brought on this new series of buildings around the state of Ohio where the sheriff and the family actually lived right in here. Now, perhaps as many as 29, perhaps as many as 19 sheriff's families lived in this building during the times when they were their father or husband was sheriff. The earliest one is Sheriff Cutler back in the 1870s. And then when you got to the end of the era of the use of this building, then you got to Eugene Jackson. Eugene Jackson was sheriff between 1965 and 1976, and during that time, he and his family lived in here. The next sheriff, William Lavery, he was still sheriff and out of this building. In other words, the jail was still being used. His office was here, but he no longer had he and his family living in this building. They lived somewhere else in town. Well, then in 1992, this building closed and the new structure was built on U.S. Route 42, just north of the city of Delaware, north and east of the city of Delaware, where it is today. You know, at the time there was a man by the name of Harley Warnstaff who was sheriff, and that was in the late 1950s, I think from 57 to 64. During the time that he was sheriff, there were perhaps 4 to 8 prisoners at any one time being held in the jail cells in that wing of the structure. Only 4 to 8. Now, by the time we got to the time period of William Lavery, you had as many as 45 or even 50 prisoners being held in a space that was originally suited for 16 people. And so it was quite a crowded condition. That's why eventually the new structure was built. I can tell you there were some escapes from here. And in fact, several escapes over the years from this structure. One where a youth who was being held was able to tunnel through the wall upstairs and jump down below and escape. Now here's one, though, that I found quite interesting. I found this out a few years ago from somebody here. They were visiting from Arizona. They were here for the fair, as they came back every year for the Delaware County Fair. He had no family here anymore, but always liked coming back to town. We were talking quite a bit about when he was a youth. They used to have out on the lawn of the courthouse, they used to have picnics, and they would have a summer concert and a picnic out on the lawn for the public. They'd draw pretty good crowds out there. And one day he said, we went to that, and being just a young kid, I'm sitting there on the ground, more interested in what's going on around me than the concert. And so I said to my father, I looked up on the roof of the back of the house, and I saw several people up there. And I said to my dad, look up there on the top of that roof up above the jail. He said, I think the prisoners are escaping. And his dad laughed and said, why don't you tell the sheriff? He's sitting right over here. He said, tell him that they're escaping. Now, my father, he said, he just figured, well, it's workers up there on top. And I said, well, I'm not going to go over and talk to the sheriff. He said, no, Gordon, no, I'm not going to talk to him. Well, he didn't. He did not go and talk to the sheriff. The next day, in the newspaper, they spoke about the fact that while everybody was watching the concert, the prisoners were escaping through the roof. It ended up being true that they were escaping, and that he said, for the rest of my life, we always had that conversation of if I had just told the sheriff that they really would have caught those prisoners, but instead they escaped. Another setting. There was once where there had been, within a month's period, 3 escapes out of the jail. And on the 3rd escape, the sheriff was not about to let this guy get away. He had just escaped. It was early in the morning, and the man the sheriff was only partway dressed, ready to go. He had his pants on, but it said in the description of the paper that he ran down this alley back here, and he said he was barefoot, and by the time he got very far, his feet were covered with dew. They said that his overalls, that the straps were dangling to the side, that his hair was a mess, and that he was a huffing and a puffing like Claypool's threshing machine crossing the Ashley Bridge. Well, enough on all the escapes, and the stories of it here. I'm going to let you walk on into this next room here with me. One question that someone might have asked, they've asked me this before, was President Hayes ever in here to see it? We don't know, but he certainly, because although he moved away from Delaware, he came back to Delaware quite a lot, even though he never lived back here again. But he came back to see friends and so forth, and certainly he would have come by here, and particularly to see the very type of jail that his reform had brought about in his hometown. And so he certainly would have seen it from the outside and stopped to look at it if in fact he did not come in the building. So this again is the law office that's used regularly by the attorneys here in Delaware. They come in here, law library. It's not their office, it's their library when they come to research things. We're going to go into the next room, and that will be the room that was actually the sheriff's office and where the dispatchers were when it was open. I remember coming in here, and I was a prisoner, but I would come in through the doorway out here, and you would come into the hallway right out here that you're going to see, and there was in the opening where I'm going to stand here is just a second, there was a glass across that, and then it had an opening, that the dispatcher or one of the deputies would say, may I help you? And you walked in the door and you talked to them right there. But let's go into that room. We are actually in the sheriff's office and in the dispatcher's office. When you were a prisoner being brought into the jail, you'd be brought in this corner right behind me. This area that's open right now, I can remember coming in here, not as a prisoner, but that was also the entryway if you wanted to stop at the sheriff's office. And there'd be a glass window here, and you'd step up to the window, and the deputies would be inside and someone there to help you. So this was the area where the sheriff's office was located. With that, I would like to turn this tour over for you so to have you see the actual jail cells, and Judge Hejmanowski will be taking over from this point. And I thank you, and cut.
Hello, I'm Dave Hejmanowski, and I thank Brent Carson for handing it off to me. We're going to talk now a little bit about the cell block itself and then go in to the cell block. As Brent mentioned, this building was built in 1878. As you can see here, it was designed by David Gibbs, an architect out of Toledo. Gibbs made a career out of designing institutional buildings, courthouses, jails, hospitals, things like that. He is perhaps most famous for designing the Wyoming State Capitol building. So if you're ever out in Cheyenne, take a look at that building and know it's got a Delaware connection. This is the original door to the cell block. It's never been changed. The paint's been touched up a little bit, but it's otherwise original. And as you can see, it comes complete with a handy peephole so that you can look inside the cell block and see what's going on in there. The door itself would have been securely bolted from the outside, so you couldn't get in without permission, and certainly couldn't get out without permission. And then once you open this very heavy door, you've got this metal cage behind it. The metal cage then opens, and that allows you an entry into this little step-in area here so that you can interact with the prisoners. And that area has another little feature, which is that door, which lets you pass things, mail perhaps, or other small items, back and forth into the cells, and that then takes us through another locked, padlocked door, and finally then into the cell block itself. And why don't you follow me in? So now we're inside the cell block, and as you heard from Brent, this was continued to be used until the late 1980s to house prisoners here until the new cell block, to the new jail that is opened up on US 42. What you see here in the individual cells, and you'll see still pictures and perhaps some other video of it later, is the artwork that was left on the walls by the prisoners when the jail closed in 1988. Here on the walls you see Truth and Justice, those paintings done by inmates here at the jail under the supervision of the jail staff. There are 4 cells downstairs and 4 cells upstairs on either side, so 16 cells total. And as you heard Brent say earlier, they could be doubled up to house 32 prisoners. There is 1 shower, and there is 1 rack for meals to be passed through from the kitchen, and that's it. Throughout these cells, you'll see a whole lot of references to late 80s culture, 70s and 80s culture. Number of references to good heavy metal and hair bands of the 80s, some anatomically correct drawings, some messages left to wives and girlfriends, but all of it left exactly as it was when the jail closed in 1988. Have fun. Look around.
The Delaware County Historical Society is supported by dues, grants, donations, and volunteers. We welcome your help with any of our worthwhile projects.